Okay, following on from the last video, we really just want to hone in on some of the features of these policies and then the impact that these policies have. So start just with infrastructure. So just continuing, basically, a lot of the initiatives that they've invested in for infrastructure have been ongoing projects, but really specific things. The new road safety package, which includes $500 million for fixing up black spots to try and reduce instances of accidents in high-risk areas. The Urban Congestion Fund, which was already a thing, but they've increased its funding from $1 billion to $4 billion, and that's going to include funds towards establishing car parks near railway lines, but also a range of other initiatives to try and reduce congestion in urban areas. The fast rail network between Melbourne and Geelong, and then there's ongoing projects like the NBN, the Melbourne to Brisbane Rail Network, the West Sydney Airport, the Melbourne Airport Rail Link that are going on consistently as well. Um, so basically what you want to do is when you're getting questions about each of these policies, because that's what majority of the SAC's going to be about, is you want to talk about how these policies can increase productivity. Most of them will boost participation. So tax reforms, welfare reforms, boost participation, um, education boost participation, research and development can, but it's generally not really that related. Infrastructure is not as related. Subsidies can if they're for childcare subsidies and things like that. But these points can be made just generally. So the links to aggregate supply, economic growth, international competitiveness, all those can be answered for all of them. But what you want to be able to do is recognise the policy in detail, which we just talked about, and then explain the impact of that policy specifically before you get onto the general impact of aggregate supply. So if we look through these slides, in terms of education, we want to improve the skills of the labour force. So improve the quality of labour and the quantity, because it also boosts participation. So that's really important, that both the quality in terms of the skills, but also the quantity, because more people are engaged in the labour force, are both increased. But try and use really specific terms, like it creates a more adaptive, responsive, dynamically efficient workforce that can, their skills are transferable to a range of different industries. It might lead to critical thinking skills, making them more problem solving, make them more aware of the skills necessary in the 21st century. All this stuff can be referred to whether you're talking about subsidies for education or just general education spending. Infrastructure, it's a bit different. We're talking about removing bottlenecks, reducing congestion, speeding up businesses, reducing petrol costs, reducing wages, connecting Australian businesses to overseas markets because they've got better infrastructure. That'll improve productivity, reduces cost of production, etc., because things can be transported easily. Research and development, okay, this is probably the one that people struggle with the most. It's about encouraging innovation, looking at new methods of production, new technology, new machinery, new processes or ideas, robotics, all this stuff that allows us to produce more efficiently and be more effective as an economy. The other thing you could mention is, you could provide examples. As I said to you in class, Wi-Fi could be used as an example as something that's improving allocative efficiency because because we get because we can get access to the internet wherever we are, so our living standards are improved. In terms of subsidies, if it was like something like addressing a supply side shock, you could talk about farmers and how it allows them to invest, it allows them to feed their livestock so they can remain viable, and that boosts aggregate supply because more businesses stay in business. So we've got more people producing in the long term. Creates jobs as well because the farm stays viable. Environmental subsidies, there's two links you can make there. If it's for renewable energy, one, that it preserves the climate, so that helps to, protect our natural resources. And secondly, that renewable energy is cheap to run in the long term, so that lowers cost of production as well. If you go down the childcare subsidy link, participation, productivity, competition for jobs, etc., etc. Taxation reforms, okay, basically you're linking it to all the P's. So it boosts productivity, there's more increased effort and productivity due to extra financial awards for working hard. You could also mention how it boosts entrepreneurialism. So lower tax rates boost entrepreneurialism because Australians have a greater incentive to set up small businesses because they're going to get taxed at a lower rate if it's a small business that's paying income tax. You could argue that foreign investors are more likely to set up businesses here. People will come here because they know we've got low tax rates and set up their own businesses here. It boosts participation because there's an incentive to go back to the workforce. And all that stuff leads to lower prices, increased competition for jobs, lower wages, increased international competitiveness, etc. In terms of welfare reforms, it's pretty much the same thing. It increases participation rates, get people actively looking for work. So, for example, the cashless card is trying to get people off drugs and trying to get them actively looking for work. That boosts competition, boosts participation, boosts competition for jobs, etc. And immigration, it's all about boosting the skills of our labour force, getting access to new skills and production methods, keeping costs of production down, making us more internationally competitive. So I just want to go through a couple of questions with you for the last 10 minutes of this video. So for example, this one here, explain using a specific example how the government supports research and development. So it's asking you for an example first. So there's clearly a mark in it for the idea, and how those innovations can promote allocative efficiency. So allocative efficiency, people really struggle with this one. Allocative efficiency is about maximizing living standards. So if you're looking at innovations and research and development, it can lead to better health outcomes. That's more allocatively efficient if we have a healthier society. A more dynamically efficient workforce. Lower prices, because a lot of it's about investing in a technology that makes us more productive. Makes businesses more responsive to consumers' needs and less unemployment. All those things can be linked to efficiency. So businesses are likely to underinvest in R&D without government intervention because there's positive externalities. The provision of this is just talking about basic grants, so cash is designed to increase the incentive to spend more on R&D into new ideas, new production methods, new markets, etc. So provide some examples. This will help businesses to innovate, become more dynamically efficient. It's therefore likely to lead to businesses being more responsive to consumers' needs. So again, Wi-Fi is a good example there. Produced at the lowest possible prices and improves allocative efficiency as resources are used to maximize consumer satisfaction and living standards. That's the definition. So living standards are better than what they would be without that research and development. Resources are allocated in a way that maximizes our living standards. With reference to two recent policies, this is another question from the last SAC. Explain how tax and welfare system could be reformed to encourage greater workforce participation and how this can improve supply, employment, growth. So you've got heaps of terms here. Supply, you want to link it to the quantity and quality of resources. Employment, why does it create jobs? Probably more internationally competitive, lower cost of production, which makes firms more willing to supply, and that all leads to stronger growth as well because people demand our products, so we produce more. So there's some ideas here that you want to talk about: lower wage pressures, increased productivity when there's more people in the workforce, explain the impact on participation, and then explain how that boosts jobs. So in the long term, that lowers wages, makes firms more willing to supply, and also makes us more internationally competitive. So in terms of the answer, in the most recent budget, so last year's budget, it includes changing the thresholds. So the tax burden will necessarily reduce, so it increases people's disposable incomes and the incentive to work. This will encourage people to work harder and more productively in the workplace. It's also likely to boost labour productivity because of the increased competition for jobs. So this reduces price pressures and international competitiveness. The increase in international competitiveness should help to boost demand for Australian goods and services, increasing production and the derived demand for labour. So again, it's about willingness to supply, international competitiveness. There's one policy there on taxes, and then you need another one on welfare. So the lower tax burden will increase labour force participation. This will help to raise the supply of labour, expand our aggregate supply potential, and then it can be complemented with things like the job compliance framework. So it makes anyone on welfare is required to make certain obligations, so like attending approved training courses and job interviews. They receive a certain amount of demerit points, and then once they've acquired a certain amount, then they can start going through this three-strike policy where they can start losing their welfare. It's also cracking down on alcohol and drugs, removing alcohol and drug dependency as an excuse for receiving welfare, but also forcing them onto the cashless card. This should help to ensure more citizens are actively seeking work, raising the competition for jobs, and boosting our supply potential. The increase in compliance should reduce the instance of hardcore and long-term unemployment, and with other welfare policies, including raising the pension age, should help boost labour force participation, increase productivity, and overall supply. So consistent links to employment, consistent links to supply, consistent links to production throughout your answer. This one's about research and development grants and how it can create full employment. So you explain what research and development grants are, that they can be used for things like, so accelerated depreciation allowances are an example. They can allow firms to invest in things like new robotics, new technology, that help to boost productivity across the economy, which allow us to produce more goods and services. It can negatively impact unemployment in the short term because businesses may become more capital intensive. So research and development can have a negative impact, but it should assist with the goal and define what the goal is: the lowest rate of unemployment without causing excessive inflation, no cyclical unemployment, because the new technology helps to boost growth. It reduces cost structures, which helps to reduce prices. That stimulates demand for our net exports, our international competitiveness, and that all helps to create more and more jobs in the economy. Explain how government subsidies to educational providers can stimulate aggregate supply and achieve price stability. So again, explain what subsidies are first, then explain how schools would use the money. So don't talk about that they go to like people. Don't talk about how they go to like school students or their parents. Talk about what the school does with them. Then you want to link it to the quality and quantity of human capital and how that boosts supply potential and economic growth. So mention human capital in your answer, mention how we spend the money, the quantity and quality of human capital. So government subsidies to educational providers are a producer subsidy that should increase the willingness of producers to supply more education or training. Subsidies are designed to improve the quality of human capital or the quantity of human capital because more people enter the labour market by reducing the cost of production for training and education providers, allowing them to invest in a range of areas. These institutions might invest in better quality courses, better quality graduates. That helps to increase our supply potential because the quality of our resources is higher. That lowers firms' cost of production, makes them more willing to supply, which helps to reduce price pressures in the economy and help us to achieve our goal of 2 to 3% inflation. So those increased skills. So key things here, identify what subsidies are, explain how the money can be used, identify that boosts the quality and quantity of labour resources, and then link that to the fact that that lowers prices because it lowers cost of production. It's a very similar question. I'm not going to go through this one, talking about what you can do with training and then linking it to price stability. In terms of infrastructure, just one weakness with infrastructure spending, which we haven't talked about. So how can infrastructure projects have weaknesses? In general terms, supply-side policies can be subject to political constraints, which potentially limit the effectiveness of these policies. The one they're talking about here is when we're leading up to an election, and this is in something we've focused on a lot, there is always the possibility that the government announces its intention to heavily spend in marginal electorates. So the idea being that too many infrastructure projects may be allocated to areas that are marginal seats, so where it's really close, so that we can basically encourage people to vote for you in that electorate. So in the lead up to the May 2019 election, the government promised to increase spending on rail infrastructure in the marginal Corangamite, I think it is, electorate. Such infrastructure investment might indeed help to expand aggregate supply, but it's questionable whether the funds could be better employed to alternative projects that benefit Australia as a whole, rather than just this particular area that's going to help them to win votes. So the idea is that the weakness is of infrastructure spending is they may just focus on areas to win votes where the voting is close. Distinguish investment in human capital from physical capital as a means to expanding aggregate supply. So human capital refers to developing skills in employees, trying to boost labour productivity and willingness to supply. Investment in physical capital refers to investment in man-made or physical items or factors that are going to help us produce, trying to boost capital productivity. So spending on robotics or machinery is investment in physical capital, whereas spending on training education is human capital. I might skip this. So this is just one question. Explain how one of the following can boost aggregate supply and the goal of strong and sustainable growth. The idea to going through this question is choose one, provide an example if possible of what they're doing. Explain how increased funding will boost aggregate supply, so how it will boost the quality or quantity of resources. Briefly define the goal, including the targets, and clearly link the improvement in aggregate supply to why it would achieve that goal. So with education, helps to boost our supply potential because of increased skills. That increases our productive capacity, allows for strong growth alongside lower prices. The last thing I'll mention in this video, I'll just get out of this, is if you go back to the information that I said on online, you need to know the strengths and weaknesses of the first four policies. So infrastructure, education, subsidies, and research and development. I don't have time to go through them all now, but if you go through this, you've got all the strengths you can link into each of the goals. So make sure you're aware of specific strengths and weaknesses for those four. I won't test you on tax concessions, tax reforms, welfare reforms, or immigration. That's it. I'm trying to stop this video, but I'm not really sure.